It was supposed to be just another peaceful weekend for Richard Kane. He was a billionaire, known for his massive business empire, luxury cars, and private jets. People called him cold, focused, always thinking about profit and numbers. It didn't mind, emotions didn't make money, and Richard didn't have time for feelings. But everything changed on one unexpected afternoon. Richard was on his way to a mountain resort with his teenage son, Daniel. They were driving in his black luxury SUV, the windows tinted, the leather seats soft and warm. The driver followed the usual highway route until they ran into a problem. A large traffic jam caused by a landslide. The road was blocked. Frustrated, Richard asked the driver to find another way. The GPS showed a longer route through a small village road. It wasn't ideal, but Richard just wanted to get to the resort and forget about business for a while. As they drove through the village, the road turned muddy and the sky grew dark. The rain had started to fall lightly, and the area looked like it had just gone through a storm. Roofs were broken, trees fallen, and some houses stood half-burned. It was not a place someone like Richard usually saw. He rolled his eyes, checking his watch. But then something outside the window caught his attention. He told the driver to stop. There, sitting in front of the charred remains of a small house, was a little girl. Her clothes were dirty and wet. Her small arms were wrapped around her knees, and her head was down. She wasn't screaming or making any noise. She just sat there, in the rain, quietly crying. Richard stared at her for a moment. He didn't understand why, but he couldn't look away. Daniel asked what was going on. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door, stepped into the rain, and slowly walked toward the girl. She looked up when she heard footsteps. Face was pale, her eyes red from crying. Richard stopped a few feet away. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. The girl shook her head. "Where's your family?" he asked again. She whispered, "Gone." It turned out her name was Emma. She was only 7 years old. Her house had caught fire during the storm 2 nights ago. Mother had gone out to look for help and never returned. Neighbors tried to check in, but most were too poor to offer much help. Since then, Emma had been sitting near the ruins, waiting. Richard was quiet. His heart felt heavy in a way he didn't recognize. He had seen people lose money, lose jobs, but never something like this, never someone this small and helpless. Daniel got out of the car, standing behind his father. "Dad, what are you doing?" he asked, confused. "I don't know," Richard replied softly. Then he knelt in front of Emma. "Are you hungry?" She nodded slightly, too weak to speak. Without another word, Richard picked her up. She was so light it made him feel even worse. He carried her back to the car, ignoring the mud on his suit. The driver looked shocked. Daniel was silent. They didn't drive to the resort that day. Instead, Richard asked to be taken to the nearest motel. It was old and far from luxury, but it had warm rooms and food. Richard ordered soup, bread, and a blanket for Emma. He sat beside her as she ate, watching her hands shake while she held the spoon. His phone kept ringing missed calls, emails, reminders about meetings. But he ignored them all. His assistant called 3 times. Didn't answer. His son watched him in surprise. "Why are you helping her, Dad?" Daniel finally asked. Richard looked at him. "'Cause I think someone should have helped me when I was her age." Daniel had never heard his father talk like that. Later that night, Richard arranged for a doctor to check on Emma. She was underfed and cold, but not seriously ill. The doctor thanked Richard and left. Emma fell asleep with the blanket tightly wrapped around her. Richard sat in the same chair for hours, thinking. He remembered a time when he too was a child, not as poor. Not as alone as Emma, but not happy either. His father had worked too much, and his mother had passed away early. He had grown up chasing money, thinking it would fill the emptiness. It didn't, not really. The next morning, child services arrived. They asked questions, wanting to take Emma into care. Richard listened, then did something no one expected. He offered to take temporary guardianship of Emma until her mother was found. The caseworker blinked. "What? You want to do what?" "I'll be responsible for her. I have the means, the space, and I won't leave her alone," he said. "You're a billionaire. isn't normal, she replied, still stunned. Richard looked her in the eyes. Maybe that's the problem. It took some time, but because he had a clean record, strong resources, and had already arranged for medical care and shelter, they agreed for now. The temporary guardianship would last until her mother was found or further arrangements could be made. He moved Emma into a guest house on one of his private properties. It was quiet, cozy, and safe. He hired a kind woman to help take care of her during the day, but he visited every morning and evening. He brought her toys, coloring books, and new clothes. Slowly, Emma began to smile again. Word started to spread among his staff. Some whispered that Richard had finally gone soft. Others said maybe he was just trying to fix his public image. But Richard didn't care what they thought. One evening, while reading a bedtime story to Emma, she leaned on his shoulder and said softly, "Thank you for not leaving me alone." Richard's heart felt full for the first time in years. Didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if Emma's mother would ever come back. But one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away from her. Not now, and that was just the beginning. What he didn't know was that this small act of kindness would change not only Emma's life, but his own and the lives of many others who were watching. Would you like me to expand part 2 next? The morning air was cool, and sunlight slowly poured into the guest house where Emma now lived. Birds chirped softly outside and inside. For the first time in days, Emma was sleeping peacefully. Richard Kane stood at the door, watching her from a short distance. She had kicked off her blanket in her sleep, one hand still holding a small teddy bear he had given her last night. Something about that simple image touched him deeply. A billionaire who once made decisions worth millions in seconds was now standing still, quietly watching over a sleeping child. His assistant, Clara, knocked gently on the side of the open door. "Mr. Kane, you have a video meeting in 30 minutes. Shall I prepare your laptop?" Richard nodded but didn't move. His eyes stayed on Emma. Clara waited, unsure of what to say. She had worked with Richard for 8 years, and never once had she seen him cancel an investment meeting. But in the last 2 days, everything had changed. When Emma finally woke up, she smiled. That smile was different, softer, safer. Richard sat beside her and asked if she wanted pancakes. She nodded quickly. He chuckled and called the guest house chef to prepare a simple breakfast. Over pancakes and orange juice, Richard asked Emma about her favorite cartoons and toys. She told him about a pink bicycle she once had and how she loved drawing flowers. Her voice was quiet but steady. For a little girl who had lost everything, she was showing remarkable courage. Richard made a silent promise to himself she would never feel alone again, not while he was around. After breakfast, Richard called a meeting with his legal team. He asked them to prepare official paperwork to extend Emma's guardianship and explore all possible ways to help her legally. His lawyer, Mark, raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to adopt her?" Richard didn't answer directly. "I just want her safe. For now, let's take it one day at a time." Mark nodded. The staff whispered behind closed doors, wondering if their powerful boss was having a midlife crisis or if this was something else. But no one dared question him directly. Meanwhile, news of the billionaire's strange act was spreading. A few local reporters had heard from someone at the motel about Richard Kane personally helping a child. It sounded unbelievable. Billionaires didn't just show up in broken villages or carry poor girls in the rain. Richard didn't want attention. In fact, he refused to comment when journalists called. But cameras began to appear outside his estate. One photo showed him holding Emma's hand as they walked in the garden. It went viral within hours. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people praised him for his kindness. Others said it was a publicity stunt. But Richard didn't care what the world thought. What mattered was that Emma was eating properly, smiling again, and drawing pictures every evening. Daniel Richards' teenage son was also watching. He had always seen his father as distant, strict, and too focused on money. But now, he was seeing a different side. A father who sat on the floor playing puzzles, who listened carefully, and who smiled without checking his phone every 2 minutes. One evening, Daniel sat with Emma while she drew. He watched her use colored pencils to make a picture of a house with flowers. "Is this your old house?" he asked gently. Emma shook her head. "No, this is my new home. The one where I'm not scared." Daniel didn't know what to say, just nodded and helped her color the sky. Later that night, Richard received a call from Child Services. They had begun searching for Emma's mother, but there were no solid leads yet. Had seen her since the fire? Tradit decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigation team and asked them to search every hospital, shelter, and police station within 100 miles. He gave them Emma's mother's name, photo, and all known details. He didn't just wait, he also made quiet donations. To several nearby communities affected by the storm, he ordered supplies, food, and clean water delivered to areas where homes had been damaged. No press release, no announcement. He simply did it because it was right. A week passed. Emma started school at a nearby private academy, the same one Daniel had once attended. She was nervous on the first day, clutching her small backpack tightly. Richard walked her to the gate himself. The other kids looked at her with curiosity, but the teacher greeted her warmly. "You'll do great," Richard told her. "I'll be right here when school ends." Emma smiled and waved. Later, while waiting in his car, Richard thought about how fast life could change. Just a week ago, he didn't even know this girl existed. Now, she had become a part of his life in a way he never expected. He had meetings to attend, deals waiting on him, but none of that felt more important than this. That evening after school, Emma ran to him with her first report, a drawing of 3 people holding hands, her, Richard, and Daniel. At dinner, that night, Richard asked Daniel if he wanted to help him build something meaningful. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. "I want to build homes, safe homes. For children like Emma, for mothers like hers, they shouldn't have to sleep on burnt floors or wait in the rain. I've got the money. It's time I used it right." Daniel was surprised, but then he nodded. "I'd like to help." And just like that, the idea was born. Richard decided to create a new program under his foundation, a program to provide emergency housing, education, and emotional care for families in crisis. Shelter. Within days, plans were drawn. His architects worked quickly. Builders were hired. But he didn't stop there. Richard went a step further and visited local councils, urging them to support better emergency care for single mothers and poor children. His sudden involvement shocked the political world. They had always known Richard Kane as a man of business, sharp, cold, and hard to reach. Now he was shaking hands with small-town mayors and comforting crying mothers in shelters.
Back home.
Emma noticed the changes too. She saw new toys arriving, not for her, but for children she hadn't met. She asked Richard about them. "These are for other kids like you," he explained. "We're helping them now." Emma smiled. "I can help too. I can share my crayons." That night, Richard looked out his window at the stars. He remembered the first time he saw Emma in the rain, small, broken, and alone. And now here she was, drawing pictures, sharing. Crayons and healing. Not just herself, but him too. He didn't know what the future would bring, or if Emma's mother would ever return. But he knew this. His life would never be the same again. And for the first time, that didn't scare him. Would you like me to continue with part 3 next? The sky was gray that morning, but Richard Kane felt hopeful. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Emma came into his life, and everything around him had changed. He still attended meetings and answered emails, but his heart was now somewhere else always. Thinking about Emma, her missing mother, and the shelter he was building in her name. Every morning, he checked in with his team of private investigators. So far, they had found nothing. No one had seen or heard from Emma's mother. It was as if she had disappeared completely. But Richard wasn't the kind of man who gave up. In business, he had always believed there was a solution if you looked hard enough. Now, he applied that same belief to finding Emma's mom. He hired more people to search former police officers, nurses who worked in small hospitals, even social workers in nearby towns. He had people looking through shelters, food banks, and public service centers, checking every name and photo at the same time. He was learning more about Emma. She loved flowers. She hated carrots. She liked brushing her hair at night while telling made-up stories about talking dogs. And every evening, she waited for Richard to read her a bedtime story. He had once been too busy to read to his own son, but now, reading to Emma was the best part of his day. Daniel noticed the change too. At first, he had felt confused and a little jealous. His father had never paid this much attention to anyone. But slowly, he began to understand. Emma wasn't just someone his father was helping. She was someone who had opened a part of Richard's heart that had been closed for years. One evening, Daniel sat beside his father after dinner. "You seem different," he said quietly. Richard looked at him. "Do you think that's a good thing?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I think it's the first time I've seen you truly happy." Richard didn't respond, but he reached over and patted his son's shoulder. That small gesture said more than words ever could. Later that week, Richard got a call from one of the investigators. A nurse from a small hospital in a nearby town had reported seeing a woman who matched the description of Emma's mother. She had been found unconscious outside a supermarket after the fire and was taken to the hospital. She had no ID, no phone, and no emergency contacts. She was weak and confused. The only thing she carried was a small, burned photo of a girl, Emma. Richard's heart raced. He asked for the hospital's location and made arrangements to visit right away. He didn't want to tell Emma yet, in case it wasn't true. He took Daniel with him and asked Clara to stay with Emma while they were gone. The hospital was small and quiet, hidden behind old trees. When Richard arrived, the nurse led him to a recovery room. There, lying on a clean bed, was a woman with dark hair and a tired face. Her eyes were closed and her hands rested over the thin blanket. Richard stepped closer and showed the nurse a recent photo of Emma. The nurse's eyes filled with tears and nodded. "That's her daughter," she whispered. When the woman slowly opened her eyes, she looked frightened. Richard introduced himself gently and explained everything how he had found Emma, taken care of her, and had been searching for her mother. At first, the woman didn't believe him. She had been living in fear, thinking Emma was gone forever. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice shaking. "I went to find help the night of the fire. I collapsed on the road. I couldn't get back."
You.
"Don't need to explain," Richard said softly. "She's safe now. She's waiting for you." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks. She covered her face and cried quietly. The hospital cleared her to leave the next day. Richard paid for all her medical bills and arranged clean clothes and supplies. He booked a car to bring her back to his home where Emma was waiting. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Clara gently told Emma that her father had gone to visit someone very important. Emma, not fully understanding, simply continued drawing a picture of a family. She didn't know that everything was about to change again. When the car finally arrived and Sarah stepped out, Emma was playing in the garden. Richard called out, "Gently, Emma. Someone's here to see you." Emma turned around. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. But then Sarah opened her arms wide and whispered, "Emma." Emma dropped her crayons and ran. The hug between mother and daughter was so strong, so full of emotion, that everyone nearby froze. Even the guards who usually stood tall with serious faces looked away to wipe their eyes. Emma clung to her mother, like she was afraid to let go. Sarah kissed her over and over, whispering, "I'm here. I'm sorry. I love you." Richard stood back, watching with emotion in his eyes. Daniel walked up next to him. "You did it?" he said. "No," Richard replied. "They did. I just followed my heart for once." That evening, Sarah sat down with Richard to talk about the future. She thanked him again and again, tears in her eyes. "You saved my daughter's life. I don't know how to ever repay you." "Already have," Richard said. "I didn't save her. She saved me." Richard offered Sarah a job in his charity foundation. She had experience working in kitchens and caring for people, and she gladly accepted. He also arranged for a small but beautiful house nearby where she and Emma could live safely. Emma visited the main estate often, sometimes staying the night. She called Richard Mr. Rich in a sweet voice that always made him smile. She drew pictures for his office and brought him flowers from the garden. The shelter project. named Emma's shelter was moving fast. Builders were already working on the first few houses. Donations began pouring in after people online learned what Richard Kane had done, but Richard stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't do interviews. He didn't hold press conferences. Just worked quietly behind the scenes, focused on building something good, something real. And every evening when he sat at his desk looking at the photo of Emma and her mother, he reminded himself that sometimes the most important business in life has nothing to do with money at all. Would you like me to continue with part 4 next? The reunion between Emma and her mother, Sarah, brought a new warmth to the estate. It was something even Richard Kane could feel in the walls of his grand mansion, a kind of gentle energy he hadn't known in years. The cold, quiet halls now echoed with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the sweet sound of bedtime stories being read aloud. For a man who used to chase numbers, deals, and deadlines, this change was like learning how to breathe again. Sarah settled quickly into her new role. She began working at one of Richard's foundation kitchens that served food to underprivileged families. She was skilled, kind, and always willing to help others. Her presence made everyone around her feel cared for, and her coworkers respected her deeply. Though she had gone through so much, she never let pain turn her bitter. Instead, she used her past to connect with people who had also lost homes, family, or hope. Richard quietly supported her in every way. He never made her feel small or helpless. He treated her as an equal and gave her space to build a new life on her own terms. Their relationship was respectful and kind. Sarah always made sure Emma knew that Richard had saved them, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Emma, on the other hand, was growing fast. Her smile was brighter, her confidence stronger. She now played in the garden with other children from the village, often inviting them to color or read books with her. She told them stories about Mr. Rich, her superhero, who wasn't wearing a cape but always showed up when she needed him most. One weekend, Richard held a small celebration at the estate to mark the official opening of the first few houses of Emma's shelter. These homes were built to provide safe living spaces for single mothers and children who had lost everything, just like Sarah and Emma once had. The event wasn't a big media show. Richard didn't invite celebrities or make speeches for cameras. Instead, he invited the families who would be living in the new homes. There were warm meals, music, and simple decorations. Children ran around laughing, while mothers held hands and cried tears of relief and joy. Sarah helped organize the whole event. She made sure every guest felt welcome and every child had something fun to do. When it was time to show the homes, Emma proudly cut the ribbon holding Richard's hand. "This is for all the kids who feel forgotten," Richard said softly as the ribbon fell. That moment was captured by a local photographer. And though Richard hadn't asked for it, the photo made its way to social media. It went viral in hours. It's a billionaire standing beside a small girl and her mother, helping others not with words, but with action. It touched millions of hearts. The next day, news outlets all over the country tried to reach Richard for interviews. Some even sent camera crews to his estate. But Richard politely declined them all. He didn't want the story to become about him. He wanted it to remain about the people, the real heroes who kept going when life gave them nothing. Daniel, watching everything from a more mature perspective, began asking deeper questions about his father's work. "You've always had money, Dad," he said one evening. "Why didn't you do something like this before?" Richard paused. "Because I thought building bigger companies was the most important thing. I forgot how to build people." Daniel nodded slowly. "And now?" "Now," Richard smiled. "I want to build lives, not just buildings." Emma continued to visit often. She would spend weekends at the estate reading new storybooks with Richard, baking cookies with the house staff, or helping in the garden. One afternoon, she handed Richard a drawing. It showed a large tree with a bench under it. On the bench were 3 figures: a man in a suit, a little girl, and a woman with flowers in her hair. At the top, she had written in her neat, childlike handwriting, "My forever family." Richard didn't speak, just hugged her gently and put the drawing in a silver frame on his desk. But even as life grew peaceful, Richard couldn't forget where this story started, with a child crying. Alone in the rain beside the ruins of her home, that image stayed with him. and it pushed him to do more. He expanded the shelter program. Within 3 months, they had begun construction on homes in 2 other towns. Local workers were hired. Volunteers came from nearby cities. People from different walks of life wanted to help because they saw something real, not just charity, but compassion in action. Richard also started offering scholarships for children affected by poverty or natural disasters. Emma was the first name on the list. She didn't know it yet, but he had already set aside a fund for her future education. He hoped one day she would grow up to help others, just like he had helped her. Sarah, too, was moving forward with purpose. She had begun speaking at small community centers, sharing her story not as a victim, but as a survivor. She always ended her talks with one message: there is always someone out there who cares. And sometimes, that someone is a stranger who turns into family. People listened. Some cried, some hugged her after, and some even asked how they could be part of the change she had experienced. One night, while sitting under the stars, Richard and Sarah talked quietly while Emma played nearby. "Do you ever wonder why you stopped that day?" Sarah asked. Richard thought about it. "I still don't fully understand. But something told me I had to. I had passed by so many people before. I think Emma was the one who finally broke through the silence inside me." Sarah nodded. "And maybe, just maybe, you were the one she was waiting for." They sat in silence for a while, both looking at the stars. Sometimes the most powerful changes in life don't come with a loud bang. They arrive quietly, like rain on a broken roof or the sound of a child's cry in the distance. Richard had built a life of wealth and power, but it was Emma who had taught him what it truly meant to live with heart. And though the world now watched from the outside, was wondering why a billionaire chose to stop for a poor girl in the rain, Richard didn't care. He knew the answer. He stopped because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes one right thing can change everything. Shall I continue with part 5 next? The sky was clear and bright as sunlight poured into the garden, where Emma sat on a soft mat, coloring in her favorite notebook. Birds flew from tree to tree, and the sound of laughter floated in the air. Life had changed so much in the past. Few months not just for Emma and her mother, Sarah, but also for Richard Kane and everyone around him. The man who was once called cold and distant by people in his own company was now known for something else: kindness, quiet, powerful kindness that had started with one small act, stopping his car and helping a crying girl near the ruins of her home. No one could have guessed then what it would turn into. But now, people from different cities, even countries, were following Richard's work, not because he was a billionaire, but because he reminded them that even powerful people can have soft hearts. His foundation. Emma's shelter had grown faster than anyone expected. The first group of homes was already full of mothers and children rebuilding their lives. A second group was under construction in another town, and there were plans for 2 more. Families who had once lost hope now had roofs over their heads, warm meals, and a safe place to sleep. Of a little girl's tears and a man who chose to care. But Richard didn't stop there. He started funding schools in underdeveloped areas, setting up clinics for free medical checkups, and creating a training program to help single mothers learn new skills. He didn't want to give them just a shelter. He wanted to give them a chance to build a new future. Still, Richard remained humble. He didn't do TV interviews. He didn't attend big events or allow cameras into his home. When asked why, he would simply say, "The real heroes are the ones who survive every day, without giving up." People admired that. He had money, yes, but what made people respect him most was his silence, his honesty, and the way he treated everyone with equal care. Back at the estate, Richard's relationship with Daniel, his teenage son, had also changed. They now ate meals together, had long talks about life, and even went for evening walks. One afternoon, Daniel asked his father if he could start a youth wing under the foundation to teach children from poor backgrounds about technology, art, and confidence. Richard smiled with pride. "I think that's a great idea," he said. "Let's build it together." Meanwhile, Emma continued to grow into a cheerful, bright little girl. Her days were filled with laughter, painting, school, and weekend visits with Mr. Rich, as she still liked to call Richard. She loved reading stories, baking cookies, and even helping Richard water the plants whenever he had meetings. She would sneak into his office, sit quietly with her crayons, and draw pictures of houses, hearts, and smiling people. One day, she gave Richard a drawing that showed a tall man holding hands with a little girl and a woman. Above the picture, she wrote, "Thank you for choosing me." Richard held the drawing for a long time. That simple sentence touched something deep in him. He had chosen her. Yes, but what Emma didn't know was that she had chosen him too. Weeks later, the foundation received an invitation from a national charity organization. They wanted to honor Richard with a special award for his service to children and families. At first, Richard refused, didn't like public attention. But Daniel and Sarah gently convinced him to attend, not for himself, but for the families, whose lives had changed. And so, on a cool evening in a quiet city hall, Richard Kane walked up to a stage, not as a businessman, but as a man who had found something more valuable than money. He held the award gently and looked at the audience. He spoke slowly and simply. "I never planned any of this. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to build shelters or change lives. I just stopped my car when I saw a little girl crying. That's all. And in that moment, I realized I had the power to help. Not because I'm rich, but because I'm human." The room went silent. People listened, some with tears in their eyes. He continued, "Sometimes we wait for big signs to do something good. But most of the time, the opportunity is already right. In front of us, we just need to open our eyes and our hearts." He ended his speech with a message that stayed in people's minds long after he left the stage. If one act of care can change one life, then maybe that life will go on too. Change others. That's how we build a better world, not with money or fame, but with love, one choice at a time. Back at the estate, life continued in peaceful rhythms. Emma got her first certificate at school and rushed to show Richard. Daniel opened the first youth program class. And Sarah received a letter from a young woman who said, Sarah's story helped her leave an abusive relationship and find safety. Even the staff who had once stayed quiet now smiled freely. Proud to be part of something meaningful. On the anniversary of the fire, the night that had once taken everything from Richard organized a private gathering with the shelter families. No speeches, no media, just music, food, and warmth. Lanterns were released into the sky. Carrying small messages of hope written by children, Emma stood next to Richard as they watched the lanterns rise. "Do you think they'll reach the stars?" she asked. Richard smiled. "I think they already have." She leaned against his side and whispered, "I'm glad you saw me that day." He put his arm around her and replied, "I'm even more glad that I didn't look away." And in that quiet moment, as lanterns floated above them and laughter surrounded them, it was clear this wasn't just a story about a rich man helping a poor girl. It was about something deeper. It was about how a single moment of kindness can change lives, awaken hearts, and create a chain of goodness that continues far beyond what anyone can see. Richard Kane may have started this journey by accident, but in the end it became his purpose. And through Emma, Sarah, and every life he touched, he left behind something more powerful than a business empire. He left behind a legacy of love. Would you like a full summary of all 5 parts, or a title card next?